Hi, and good evening, everyone. My name is Jody Rabhan, and I'm the Chief Policy Officer at the National Council of Jewish Women. I bring greetings from the National Board and staff. What a treat it is to be here to help kick off NCJW Chicago North Shore and South Cook sections three-part Zoom salon. Let's talk fact or fiction. That looks at all the information and misinformation we're bombarded with today. Tonight's Zoom is the first in the series. Let's talk My Truth, Your Truth, propaganda through history. I want to thank Jan Schwartz for her incredible work in getting this off the ground. An important look at what is real and what isn't, at what one could argue is the most critical time in our democracy. From the dismissal of science and research, cries of a stolen election, what happened on January 6th, fiction is being peddled as truth through political leaders, online platforms, and news sources. And a large portion of the electorate is consuming this steady diet of untruths. Back in 2017, the BBC asked a panel of 50 experts from across the spectrum, so scientists, business leaders, entrepreneurs, to name what they saw as the key challenges in their area. Many of them named the breakdown of trusted sources of information as one of the most pressing problems, noting that without a common starting point, a set of facts that people with otherwise different viewpoints can agree on, it will be hard to address any of the problems that the world now faces. Well, this issue only seems to have amplified since then, and particularly during the pandemic, in which we all retreated into information bubbles, mostly online, where truth pushed into our feeds wasn't always the reality. In a democracy committed to freedom of speech, our values, our very system is on shaky ground, perhaps even shakier than we realized, as we clearly saw on January 6th. Get ready for an incredible salon tonight, and be sure to mark your calendars for the second and third in the series you won't want to miss. On October 21st at 7 p.m. Central Time, Let's Talk, Truth or Consequences, and October 25th at 7 p.m. Central Time, Let's Talk My Rights, Your Rights. Kudos to NCJW Chicago North Shore and South Cook sections for bringing this timely and important topic to the fore. And now it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Sharon Johnson, President of NCJW South Cook section, who along with her committee made tonight's program possible. Sharon, over to you.
Thank you, Jody. So glad you could join us tonight. As Jody said, my name is Sharon Johnson, and I'm the proud president of the National Council of Jewish Women, South Cook section. So welcome everyone to part one of a three-part virtual event, Let's Talk My Truth, Your Truth, Propaganda Through History, which again is presented by Chicago North Shore and South Cook sections. This program will include closed captioning and will be made available as a recording. Please post any questions you may have in the chat. We will try to answer as many as possible during the program. You will be hearing from Chuck Meyers, a Holocaust educator since the mid-70s, and he served as the Senior Program Associate for the Facing History and Ourselves Chicago nonprofit organization. He will be joined by Stephen Luckert, for 20 years, the Senior Program Curator of the Levine Institute for Holocaust Education, located at the United States Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. Chuck?
Thank you, Sharon. This is kind of like the Academy Awards. We have a lot of people to thank, and we haven't even begun the presentation yet. I wanted to thank our committee as well, and also thanks to the people who were on listening to this presentation. We recognize these are perilous times, and the more information, the more education that we can impart to people, I think the better off they'll be in making choices. And knowing the truth is certainly part of the choice-making process. I wanted to especially thank Steve Luckert for partnering with me for this presentation. I want to hold up something that he's very familiar with. This is State of Deception. The Power of Nazi Propaganda, which he co-authored with Susan Bachrach, the U.S. Holocaust Museum. I first met Steve in 2006 when the when the exhibit was in Chicago at the Natural History Museum. And I was impressed with the way that the exhibit was organized, but more impressed, I think, with his knowledge of, his very broad knowledge of propaganda, origins and derivation. So I'm glad to partner with Steve tonight. There'll be more about his introduction later. He has a vita which is very long, and I'll come back to it later. We've essentially split this presentation into 3 parts. The first part, which I'll take, is about a half an hour long, roughly, and it's about the history of propaganda. Now, propaganda is not new. You understand that. Propaganda is a form of persuasion. But what I'll do is go back to the origins of propaganda as we know it, trace it through the 17th, 18th, and 19th into the 20th century, and then look at propaganda as it was probably most importantly displayed during the First World War with the help of a couple of propaganda posters and a song that most people know very well. Then we'll transition into Steve's piece, which is propaganda in Germany in the 1930s. The third part of the evening will be dedicated to propaganda and global anti-Semitism. And toward the end, we'll take some questions off the chat. So that's the method, that's the madness and the method. We are the kind of the beginning of the show with 2 parts to follow us. So what we hope to do is form the basis for everything that happens after us. I mentioned that these are perilous times. I think Jody alluded to the kinds of contests that we see. January 6th, elections, North versus South, freedoms, judgment, decisions. We're a very, very divided nation at this point. And while we would like to say that there's hope that these divisions are going to end, it's not likely that it's going to end in the immediate future. So part of the purpose of this series of broadcasts is to look at the notion of truth. Who owns it? In what way is it accurate? You may remember several years ago, a person who I will not name, who was an advisor to the former president, said that there were alternative sets of facts. Who gives us information? Do they have an agenda? If so, what's the agenda? As individuals, we tend to make statements which we believe. And we hope that people who listen to us will believe that they're true. But what happens when we say something that has a deeper motive? It may be to convince someone, it may be to manipulate them, it may be to move them to act. Whatever the motive happens to be, it's that element of information that then gets converted into an action, which sometimes can be very divisive. And that's part of, I think, the reason why we live in such difficult times. At the heart of truth is information. We don't have to listen to Dr. Fauci for very long to hear the importance of facts in deciding why it's important to wear masks, listen to physicians and experts. That's just an elementary part of the process. But tonight we're going to look at truth from a unique perspective through the role of propaganda. Let me offer a disclaimer to begin with. Propaganda has become a loaded term. It's sometimes seen as a negative. I believe I think from its beginnings, we'd like to think of propaganda as a neutral term, without the emotional color that it's taken on in this era. But propaganda has a context. So we'll look at the color, we'll look at the context. It has all sorts of shapes, it has all sorts of sizes. It can be brazen and subtle. It can be smooth, it could be disquieting. It could be overt, it could be subversive, it could be simple, it could be complex. It arrives during peacetime, and it's probably most obvious during war times, during times of great national strain. So by its nature, propaganda is designed to create an impression, often a favorable impression, to influence an individual or a group, And then most importantly, to take the next step, to act on what information you have and do something. And it's at this stage that propaganda can be most productive or most destructive. At its root, look at the word propaganda for a moment. At its root is the word propagate, which means to encourage, to spread information, to encourage people to do something with that information ultimately. The act of persuasion predates propaganda. It was around a long time before the term propaganda was ever used for the first time. We could probably think back to the cave times when Grog tried to persuade Erg to use fire for the first time because fire kept the cave warm. You can go out and collect sticks and then rub the sticks together. That was a process. But in order to urge Erg to do it, he had to go through a persuasion process. That predates propaganda. But the first actual use of propaganda, at least the term propaganda, comes from an organization which in Italian is the Congregatio de Propaganda Fide, the Congregation for the Propagation of the Faith. It was an organization within the Roman Catholic cardinals founded in 1622 to carry on missionary work for the purpose of conversion. That wasn't new to the church. In the late 1400s, Father Ignatius Loyola founded the religious order, the Society of Jesus, to propagate the faith. But 150 years of both twinning the cross and the sword, plus the imprimatur of the Congregation of Cardinals, improved the practice. In its most positive sense within the Catholic Church, propaganda meant to promote membership, to convert to the true belief, to attract to a true cause, and bring people into the faith. Propaganda has a second effect. When it's created by unprincipled people whose goal is to manipulate, to get people to do something which is essentially inhumane and destructive. During the 1930s, we saw this in the Soviet propaganda under Stalin. We saw it in the 1930s into the 40s with Nazi propaganda, which Steve will allude to. It's propaganda that leads to the murder of humans. But it's not simple. It's not a matter of going out and tell people to do the killing. It's a process. And the process is often expedited by the use of words and images. So let me give you an example. For many years, the cigarette industry you could see the cigarette industry through the marketing system and through movies, culture. Watch Humphrey Bogart movies. He smokes in almost every one of his films. Humphrey Bogart died of cancer. Remember the Marlboro Man from the 1950s? Tough, riding the horse, leaning forward. Cigarettes were culturally acceptable, preferable. They made you cool. Kids started smoking at the age of 12, 13 because they wanted to be part of the in crowd. That was the culture of cigarette smoking. While the culture was evolving, research was already going on into the effect of smoking. Scientists were beginning to understand that there was a correlation between lung cancer and cigarette smoking. And it wasn't until the Surgeon General put the stamp on cartons of cigarettes that it became more understandable that there was a direct correlation between smoking and cigarettes. Once that was known, once the marketing changed, the marketing of cigarette propaganda, smoking began to decrease. And today it's one of its all-time level lows. So propaganda rises, it falls, it depends on words, it depends on images, it depends on the media, newspapers, television, radio, and especially the social media today. We selectively choose what we like to interpret, the kinds of information that we use to develop the decisions that we make. Political candidates tell us what's true. what to believe in, but is it? Watch the 5:30 news on any given night. Now I say 5:30 in Central Time, 6:30 to 4:30, 3:30. Watch the number of commercials that are put on television about pharmaceuticals. The audience during that time tends to be an older audience. Pharmaceuticals of the type that are displayed on commercials tend to appeal to older individuals. So there's, again, a correlation between the media and the information that's being received through the media at that time of the day. Another piece of wisdom that's important to think about as we go through this: people tend to listen to what supports their own perceptions. They subscribe to news or cable channels that use language that reflects a select position. Was January 6th an insurrection or a riot, or was it a public gathering that got out of control? It depends on who you listen to. So what we're going to do tonight is to try to break the chain, to promote awareness through a series of methods that we suggest so that people become more aware of the patterns of information that are out there, what those patterns ask people to do, what those patterns are composed of, the images and words, and to ask people to think about reason and try to put emotion into the back to find objective causes. So it's a form of persuasion. As I said, propaganda has been with us for a long time. It's only in the 20th and 21st century that it's really become the epicenter of communication. So let's go back about 100 years to the early days of the 20th century, to Europe on the brink of war. 1914, Europe was on the brink. Colliding alliances, old world empires on the verge of collapse, international enmity, new weapons, old hostility. The world was waiting for a spark. The spark was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Sarajevo. The spark set off the blaze. Nations mobilized for war. The war was expected by over Christmas, 1914, but it stretched on for 4 long years. Millions of soldiers and civilians were killed, endless suffering. One example, July 1st, 1916 on the Somme, 125,000 British dead, 200,000 French dead, 500,000 Germans. Unimaginable numbers. Verdun, Passchendaele, more dead, more wounded, more missing. Trench warfare, stalemate, no movement. Woodrow Wilson promoted himself as the man who kept America out of war, but pressure was mounting by 1917. German submarines were sinking American ships, pressure from France and England to break the impasse. On April 6, 1914, Woodrow Wilson asked Congress for a declaration of war. They granted it. America was at war, but wasn't in the war. We needed a prompt, an accelerant. The British propaganda board had already exploited American sympathy. On April 24th, 1917, Woodrow Wilson created the Committee on Public Information by executive order. The object was to create a favorable impression of American entry, to propagate, to enlist film, pamphlets, cartoonists, musicians, authors were recruited to shape public opinion. Tonight, you're going to see 3 examples of American propaganda at work. Two propaganda posters and a song. Now, I was a teacher for many years, and I needed a student, so I found one. Sylvia? Thank you, Sylvia. Sylvia is my wife. For each image, Sylvia is going to react to 3 questions. What do you see? What does it mean? And what does it ask you to do? Kim, let's put up the first image. Sylvia, what do you see?
Well, there are a number of things that draw my attention, and the one that draws my attention first is the face. That is, there are things about the face and the things that are connected to the face that I absolutely notice. Um, First of all, it looks like he's crawling. He's wearing a helmet. He's also holding a weapon, and there's appears to be blood on the weapon. I see also that his fingers have blood on them. And then I notice that there's a building that looks like it's been destroyed. And then I go down as I look at, but that's what I'm drawn to first. And then it looks like that blue area is water. And then as I go down, I'm drawn to the word Hun and beat back the Hun. And it's telling me that there's a situation where there's going to be a conflict, or there already is a conflict. Then if I go down a little, I look at the word beat back, and to me that means you have to defeat the Hun. And so who is the Hun in this poster? And I came to the realization it's Germany. And what's the purpose of this poster is made aware when you go further down. It says beat back the Hun with Liberty bonds. So it's a matter of, and this is speaking for the United States or aimed at the citizens of the United States, we're going to raise money to fight in the war. And the overall message seems to me to be that Germany is a threat to the United States as well as to what's happening in Europe, and something must be done about it. It's time for the United States to do something about it. And what must be done from this poster is to buy Liberty bonds.
Okay, so you've explained what you've seen, what it means, and ultimately the purpose of this poster is to buy Liberty bonds. There was one additional observation that you made when we were looking at this poster for the first time. In back of the words, there's a blue area. What did you think that was?
Well, originally, I think it's an ocean, and it's representing that the war is occurring not in the United States, but in Europe.
Okay. Okay, Kim, let's put on number 2. What do you see? What does it mean? And what does it ask you to do?
Well, initially when I looked at this, I didn't look at the wording, but I was drawn to the picture, the illustration. And there were people that I was drawn to, and it was not the people who were coming through the door. The people I was drawn to looked like a family. So there's an elder, there's probably a husband and wife, and then a baby. But then the other people become important to me, and they're coming through the door, and I have the impression they're not friendly, they're not welcome. This is an intrusion, and they're wearing helmets, so it feels like it's some kind of army or representative of an army. And that put me back to the wording. And it starts with, is your underlined and bold home worth fighting for? So this is the sense of convincing someone or many people that you have to fight. We have to protect our home. We have to protect our beliefs. And if you go down to the next set, it says it will be too late to fight when the enemy is at your door. We're already needed to be partaking in this war. And so the urgency is join now. Join what? And the idea, I think this is an enlistment poster, that we're going to have to fight, and we need, for me, it felt like it was the men first, and the able men, obviously not the older gentlemen who would be supportive, but we have to enlist, we have to partake, we have to be participating. And it, because of the people coming through the door, the sense is that it's because of Germany. Germany is an immediate threat. They're coming through the door, invading this home.
Okay. Kim, number 3, the song. If we can't hear the music, I have a backup for this, but we can't hear it. Okay, let's try it again. Yep.
Johnny, get your gun, get your gun, get your gun. Take it on the run, on the run, on the run. Hear them calling you and me, every son of liberty. Hurry right away, no delay, go today. Make your daddy glad to have had such a lad. Tell your sweetheart not to pine, to be proud her boy's in line. Over there, over there. Send the word over there. That the Yanks are coming, the Yanks are coming. The drums rum-tumming everywhere. So prepare, say a prayer. Send the word to beware. We'll be over, we're coming over, and we won't come back till it's over, over there, over there, over there. Send the word over there, that the Yanks are coming, the Yanks are coming, the drums rum-tumming everywhere. So prepare, say a prayer, send the word to beware. We'll be over, we're coming over, and we won't come back till it's over, over there. Johnny, get your gun, get your gun, get your gun. Johnny, show the Hun you're a son of a gun. Hoist the flag and let her fly. Yankee Doodle do or die. Pack your little kit, show your grit, do your bit. Yankees to the ranks, from the towns and the tanks. Make your mother proud of you, and the old red, white, and blue. Over there, over there. Send the word over there. That the Yanks are coming, the Yanks are coming. The drums rum-tumming everywhere. So prepare, say a prayer. Send the word to beware. We'll be over, we're coming over, and we won't come back till it's over.
Okay, Kim, number 4. Okay, so here we have the lyrics to the song, and you just heard it as most Americans would have heard it through either through concert halls, records, any way they can get the song into the public domain. But here are the lyrics. And again, I'm going to ask Sylvia to look at these lyrics. We'll take a few minutes. What do you see, or what did you hear? What did it mean? And what's it encouraging you to do? Sylvia?
Well, one of the first things I do notice about the song is that it's written in 1917, and that's the year that the United States entered the war. So right there, we've got the whole purpose of why this song was written and why it became popular. And the first line says, "Johnny, get your gun. Get it? We're on the run. We're in a hurry." And that this appeal is to every son of liberty, anyone in our country or in the world who believes in liberty. And I think that's also possibly a reference to France and England, who are already involved. And then as I go down the lyrics, I get to the part where it says, "Make your daddy glad," and you go on, "and tell your sweetheart not to pine." So it's not for you alone. It's for the family. It's for the country. For the women, for the wives, the mothers, sisters, everyone. And over there, send the word again, send the word over there. There are 2 groups of allies, and they are waiting for us to help, to partake or participate. And so, and then if you go down to the line where it says, "So prepare, say a prayer," it's hope for the best for the world. It's right in there in the lyrics. And it continues, "And we won't be back till it's over there. We're committed. Our country is committed to fighting and winning." And then you get back to "Johnny, get your gun," and the repetition, "Show the Hun." And if you think of the first poster that we looked at, the Hun, and the way he's portrayed, who's the son of a gun. So we need to hoist our flag, let her fly. We will fly the flag and fight. No matter it, Yankee Doodle do or die, no matter personal conscience and personal loss, we will be part of this. So we're ready. You have to pack your kit as Americans and be ready to go and fight. Do your bit. So from everywhere, from the towns and the tanks, make your mothers proud of you, and the old red, white, and blue, from everywhere and everyone. And the whole, and then we get the repeat at the beginning, repeat it twice. It's repeated the second time to get the point across. The message of the song: there's a war going on in Europe, so get going and enlist.
Sylvia, thank you. You're a wonderful teacher. You're a wonderful colleague here. Thank you for being my student.
You forgot to mention wife.
Oh, yes. Thank you for being my wife. Americans enlisted in the thousands after this campaign began. As a result of the propaganda campaign, which initially was created by Wilson's Committee on Public Information, the war was fought over there. It ended in November 11th, 1918. Something like 400,000 Americans were killed in the conflict. It was the first calamity of the 20th century, but it wasn't over. It wasn't over there. The roots of another conflict had already been planted. For the next 30 minutes, Steve Luckert is going to focus on Germany in the 1930s. Steve has over 20 years as curator of museum's permanent exhibit. He has curated 8 special exhibits, including, as I mentioned before, State of Deception, but I got the year wrong. It was at the Natural History Museum in 2013. He received his PhD in modern European history from the State University of New York at Binghamton. He's appeared on innumerable news outlets, CNN, NBC Nightly News, the New York Times, Washington Post. I could go on. After Steve's presentation, we'll come back again together and look at the third element of our presentation tonight, which is propaganda and global anti-Semitism. And we'll pick some questions from the chat and use those as the focus for our discussion. Steve, it's all yours.
Chuck, thank you very much. And I want to thank Sylvia as well for doing that great analysis of over there and of the posters. So thank you very much. And I want to also thank the National Council of Jewish Women, both the North Shore and the South Cook sections, as well as Jody from the National Leadership, and Sharon, Donna, and Jen and Kim for all the help that they've provided to make this program happen. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Nazi propaganda, and what Chuck did was, I think, great for this, because he opened the way up with a discussion of the First World War. Now, if we could go to my presentation, Kim. All right, let's go to the next slide, because I think Chuck covered a lot of this. When Chuck brought up about the First World War and its and propaganda and its role in the United States, I wanted to also bring up the figure of Adolf Hitler as well as others, because Hitler was one of those individuals who learned a great deal from Allied propaganda. Hitler was a soldier in the German army during the First World War. And in Mein Kampf, his kind of turgid autobiography, he talks about what he learned about propaganda as a soldier during that war. And that experience was something that helped form his character. Hitler believed very strongly that Germany didn't lose the war on the battlefield. Germany lost the war for two reasons. One, they were stabbed in the back by internal enemies, Jews, leftists, pacifists, liberals, and other civilians. And that Allied propaganda had sapped Germany's will to fight. That over the course of years, that Allied propaganda caused Germans to want peace and not to continue fighting. So they lost the will to fight. Now, Hitler also looked at Allied propaganda, and he believed that the Allied propaganda was extremely successful in mobilizing its own population. So that, for instance, the images that you saw earlier of the Hun that Sylvia analyzed, for Hitler, that was a brilliant stroke of propaganda, because what he saw in that was that the British and Americans had created an image of the enemy that was so powerful that in one image, you could explain all your warrings. That is, you explained to your population why they had to fight and die. That is, that Hun that was looking over from Europe was looking at you, at the United States, as the next victim of conquest. And that destruction that the Hun, the Germans brought to Europe was going to happen in the United States unless you did something. So for Hitler, learning about what the Allies did, and what he saw as Allied success was something that was extremely important. Now, he argued that German propaganda, in contrast, was a total failure during the First World War, because he argued the Germans created comic figures of, a funny John Bull or a goofy Uncle Sam, but that didn't tell anybody why they had to fight and die. If your enemy is such a buffoon, they should be defeated right away. It wasn't threatening enough. It didn't work as propaganda to mobilize people. Now, Hitler learned a great deal about this as soon after the war was over, when he entered into politics and became the leader of the Nazi Party, one of many small extremist groups with a strong right-wing agenda that emerged in that kind of chaos of defeat in Germany and the kind of economic and political dislocation that happened during the Weimar Republic, when Germany became a democracy. Now, Hitler in Munich, he looked at a lot of posters that were collected by an individual whose last name was Reza. Now, Reza was a collector of propaganda, and he amassed a huge amount of materials from the Allies, from various political parties. And he had, I don't know, 50 rooms or many rooms filled with this stuff. Well, Hitler, when in the early 1920s, maybe 1920, 1921, would go and visit him and look at that propaganda because he wanted to learn from it. And that's something he took in. That is, he learned from what he saw success. That is, he saw the Allies were successful. He copied things that, for instance, the Mussolini did in fascist Italy. If you think about the salute, which comes from ancient Rome, or the uniforms, the brown shirts instead of the black shirts, there was Hitler learned from what he saw as from the best models. He learned from what was happening from the left, the Social Democrats, as well as the communists. But he was also someone, whether because of his own artistic background or just because of his obsession with propaganda, was somebody that was willing to implement new ideas and was very innovative in that. Now, I want to show you two posters that were done in 1932 when Hitler ran for president. Now, Hitler didn't win, but he got 13, 14 million votes in those elections. Now, I want to show you, I bring up these two posters, and you can see there's a slight difference between these. And it shows some kind of experimentation that the Nazis did and the kind of ways in which they were interested in how people reacted to visual information. Remember, for Hitler, if you look at this image, first of all, it portrays Hitler the way a lot of film stars were presented at that time period, silhouetted against a black background. That is, his face comes very much forward against that black background. It presents him as a leader of strength, will, and determination, the kind of person that you would want to lead you during the Great Depression. And it also is just one word, just says Hitler. And it also was part of the propaganda that Hitler created around himself. That is, that Hitler branded himself, working with Heinrich Hoffmann, his photographer. He created an image of himself as a public persona. Now, we're used to that. You know, our contemporary political scene is one in which every politician goes through media training. They look at body language and its impact on audiences. That was relatively new in the 1920s, but Hitler grasped that. There was a whole series of photographs that he had Hoffmann take of him in 1926, 1927, where he's practicing gestures in front of the camera. Now, what he's, you know, to us it might seem kind of comical looking at those in hindsight, but those he's practicing, you know, what kind of gestures he's going to use in those beer halls and in public speaking. And this is something, if you go through media training, they tell you, you know, to pick out a particular, you know, hand gesture or something that you're going to represent, you know, a key idea or or to emphasize a particular point. When I went through media training, they said to me, think about what President Obama does when he holds like a tennis ball. When he goes like that, it's to emphasize an important point he wants to make. Well, this was something Hitler came to understand in the 1920s. And this is something that he implemented. Now, with this poster, the other thing I wanted to bring up is that the Nazis held this poster up until the final weeks of that electoral campaign, because they argued that the other candidates for president were going to use brightly colored posters. And they said, if you put this one up, this is the one that people are going to notice. And they were right. When you see this against kiosks and things, your eye is drawn to this. Now, posters are meant to capture your attention and hold it for a relatively short amount of time. So it's to convey an image very quickly. And if you have a strong visual, something that's going to enable you to see it and quickly comprehend its message, it's going to work. Now, if we can go to the one thing I wanted to point out is what you see the difference here is that kind of one has the kind of point over the eye and the other one doesn't. And they actually tested these with Germans to see which one worked better. And it was the one without that dot over the eye that worked better. So that the Nazis, I mean, so oftentimes we think of them as just being a bunch of thugs and illiterate, gangsters, but actually in many ways they were quite sophisticated. And they tested their ideas out with audiences, often surreptitiously, but they were interested in gathering kind of public opinion about what worked and what didn't work, and then kind of going forward from that. Well, if we can go to the next slide. Kim, can we move to that next slide? Thank you. Oh, we went too far, baby. Oh, go back a couple. No, I think we're going forward. Wait a minute. Well, I guess now you'll see what all the things I'm going to present. If we can go to the swastika one that says trademark logo. And I bring this up because when you think about it, when I talk about Hitler branding himself and as a politician, creating this public persona, it's also something they did with the Nazi Party. Remember, if you're competing with other groups, whether that's other political parties or other, organizations, you want to create something that distinguishes you from the rest of the pack. And that was something the Nazis did, whether that's the image that Adolf Hitler created of himself or the use of this flag. Now, what Hitler did, Hitler created this banner in 1920. Now, it uses the swastika that you see in the middle. Well, the swastika is a symbol that's found in many cultures, from ancient India to Iran to China to Africa to Native American culture. It's even found in some ancient Jewish synagogues. So it's a multicultural symbol. It's found in many different places. But it's been used by various right-wing groups as a kind of a link to the Aryan past, which they identified with the civilizations of India and Iran. But what Hitler did is he took that symbol and he combined it with those three colors. That is the red, black, and white. Now you probably say, well, what difference does that make? Well, those were the three colors of the old German imperial flag. So they resonated with people, excuse me, who remembered the old empire with fondness. So that it drew them in. Red was a color also that the communists and socialists used, and it had a very strong emotive power. Hitler understood this too, because when he was starting out with the Nazi Party, he was its first director of propaganda. He created the first, one of the things he did when he created posters was that he had them printed in red, because he knew that that was provocative and that would get people into those beer halls. But in creating this flag, essentially what he was doing was creating a trademark or a logo that linked directly to the Nazi Party. That is, if you saw that symbol, you thought Nazi Party. So that was a way of distinguishing the Nazi Party from 30 other political parties. Remember, Germany had a multi-party system, not just the two parties in the United States, but about 30 different ones. So for Hitler, you have to create an emblem that's going to separate you from the rest of the pack. Now, and that became indelibly linked with the Nazi Party, as it is today. Now, if we can go to the next slide. Now, I want to show this painting for a couple of reasons. This was done in 1936, 1937 by a one-armed German, actually Nazi painter, Hermann Otto Heuer. And it has, the title of it is very interesting because it's called "In the Beginning Was the Word." Now, of course, some of you will know that that phrase comes from the New Testament book of John, and it refers to Jesus. But instead of Jesus, you have Adolf Hitler as this Messiah. And you see that the way the artist has portrayed him, the light emanates off his face onto the rest of the crowd. And the crowd itself is interesting too, because they're very individual faces, but it is meant to be a kind of a microcosm of German society, so that you have people of various ages, people of various classes. You have men and women there attending this meeting. And in what it aims to show are two different things. One, the importance of the spoken word. Hitler believed very strongly that the spoken word was responsible for all the great events in history, that whether that's Christianity onwards. And he was someone who was a gifted orator, and he believed very strongly in the emotional appeal of language. And those people, if you look at the accounts left by people who heard him, they often talk about how they felt like he was talking directly to them. So this painting conveys the notion that Hitler speaks for all Germans, and that all Germans find Hitler appealing. Now, this is something that goes to a point that Adolf Hitler was already making in the 1920s and early 30s, and well into the 1930s and 40s, which is that the Nazi Party represented all Germans, regardless of what class you belonged to, whether you were a prince, whether you were a merchant, or whether you were a worker or a farmer, whether you were Catholic or Protestant, you could be a member of the Nazi Party. Jews, of course, were excluded because they were defined by the Nazis as a separate race. And then often Nazis would say, it doesn't matter what region you come from. Regionalism was very strong in Germany for centuries. And so Hitler's, the Nazis say, doesn't matter if you're Prussian or Bavarian or Saxon or whatever, you can all be a part of the Nazi Party. That is, the Nazi Party is one big tent open to almost all, it's open to all ethnically and racially pure German citizens. Now, and so this is something that the Nazis brought out in their propaganda of the 1920s and afterwards, was that the Nazi Party was a truly national party. They would say democracy is just a collection of special interest groups represented by political parties. You've got political parties representing the Bavarians, political parties representing the Catholics, political parties representing big business, political parties representing the workers. But you don't have a party, Hitler would say, that represents all Germans except the Nazi Party. And so that was something that they trumpeted, that they were an inclusive political movement. And often they refer to themselves as a movement, not as a political party. Now, the last thing I want to say about this painting is that it belongs to the US Army. That this was one of about 8,000 to 10,000 pieces of of German art that was deemed to promote either German militarism or Nazism and was brought to the United States after the war. The vast majority of those pieces were returned to Germany, except for about 400, 450 pieces that remain in Washington today. And so this is one of those particular paintings. Now, if we can go to the next slide. Now, what you have to remember is that the Nazi Party was very skillful in winning over people for a variety and through a variety of different techniques and approaches. One of the things that they did, of course, was to present, not only to present the party as uniting all Germans in this kind of national community, but to use their kind of outsider status to say when the Great Depression occurred and you have millions of Germans that are unemployed, to say, well, you can't blame us. We didn't hold power. That the parties that had been in office for those 13 years had been responsible for everything bad. They had signed the Versailles Treaty. They were responsible for this economic chaos and political chaos. And they would say, why not give us a chance? You can't blame us for what happened before. And so they portrayed themselves as a viable political alternative. And what happens is that during the Great Depression, when you have millions of people unemployed and a kind of a political crisis that's an economic crisis going on, that you create an atmosphere where people are susceptible to those kind of appeals that the Nazis made. And what's interesting to note, if you think about this, is how quickly the Nazi Party grew. 1928, the Nazi Party has 12 seats in the German parliament out of about 500. 2.6% of the seats. They're nothing. 1930 comes along, they get 107 seats. From 12 to 107. Less than 2 years later, 1932, they get about 230 seats. They become the largest political party in Germany in terms of representation in the parliament. No political party had ever done that in German history. No political party, I think, had done that in world history. That was a meteoric rise from nothing to political prominence. Now, they were able to do this during a time of crisis, but they were able to convince many Germans, millions of Germans, who never would have voted for the Nazi Party in the past, to cast their votes for them. People deserted a lot of the centrist mainstream parties to throw their votes to the Nazi Party. You had a kind of a polarization going on between the left and the right. That middle dropped out for the most part. So people left the parties they had supported before and went over to the Nazi Party saying, well, let's give this guy a chance. Now, Hitler was very skillful at the way he marketed himself as well. remember when the Nazi Party was anti-Semitic from the core, but they realized from their interviews with various groups and the feedback they were getting that anti-Semitism didn't play with all audiences. That is, hardcore racists bought into that. But it didn't work for a lot of Germans. And they often did this by region. Some areas anti-Semitism was very strong. Other areas it wasn't very strong. And the local groups would say, our constituents aren't interested in the Jewish question. They are interested in economic issues. They're interested in something else. Talk about that. And that's what the Nazis did. When Hitler runs for president in 1932, he downplays anti-Semitism. He really doesn't use it. Doesn't mean he's not anti-Semitic, no, but he knows if he wants to get more Germans to vote for him, he doesn't use it. Now, of course, when the Nazi Party comes into power, in 1933, Hitler's appointed chancellor. Within days, within about 4 days of taking power, the new regime restricts the rights of other political parties to engage in propaganda, to hold meetings. They also, and in that first 100 days, you have the Reichstag Party decree, Reichstag Fire Decree, which takes away the civil liberties of all Germans, gives the police the rights to wiretap, to make arbitrary arrests, etc. And that lasts till 1945. So that continues on. You have the first anti-Jewish legislation in that first 100 days. The first concentration camps set up in those first 100 days. In less than 6 months, Germany goes from being a state with over 30 political parties to being a state with just one, the Nazi Party. They eradicated democracy in a matter of months. And that they quickly moved to do that. Now, and they also, in that same 100 days, created a Reich Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda of Joseph Goebbels. And that organization was able to essentially took control over media and culture. That is, they dictated what could or couldn't be said in the press and who could work as a journalist, as an editor, or in film, the arts, etc. All that was regulated. And so you had not only a crackdown on political opposition, but you have this powerful propaganda apparatus that's also linked with the Nazi Party's own propaganda apparatus, which still exists. And that goes down to the grassroots level of German society. And every block, there's somebody responsible for putting up propaganda, for making sure people go to meetings, to report back on how that went. The Nazis are very interested in how people react to their messages. Now, another thing that they do is, of course, is to try to change people's behavior. Propaganda aims to both shape public opinion and also behavior. Think about this, the Nazi salute, now, or the German greeting, Heil Hitler. Now, these were things that, there was no law that said you had to do this, but it was, it was something that was expected. And if you think about it, when people throw it, this is a photograph from 1937, and you see Germans giving this salute. And if you think about it, what does that do? Well, first of all, people throw their arms up. You don't know if they believe it or don't, right? That is, we might say, oh, they're all Nazis. But think about it if you don't do it. You're calling attention to yourself and saying, so that you're telling everybody else that you don't support that regime. So that you could possibly be, an opponent of that regime. So even if you didn't believe in all of that stuff, in all these Nazi ideas, you still threw your hand up. because you don't want to risk being beaten up or arrested or something. So, but if you think about it, when everybody does it, it conveys the notion to everybody else, oh, everybody's backing the regime. Now, the Nazis were successful in winning over many Germans in the 1930s after they took power, even in the dictatorship. If we can go to the next one, next slide. And one of the things that they did was to show that all the things that the Nazis had accomplished, to show success. And nothing helps propaganda more than success. So that, for instance, this is a poster done in 1935 for the 1936 for the plebiscite, and this kind of popular referendum. And it says, the Führer Adolf Hitler promised the motorization of Germany. And it says, you know, okay, 1932, before Hitler came to power, you had this many cars in Germany. You had this many workers in the German auto industry. 1935, you've got this many cars in Germany. You've got this many people employed. And it says, you know, it says, you know, he created 2.5 million jobs, etc. That Hitler's also creating the Volkswagen. That is the people's car. That is something that will be inexpensive enough so that more Germans can have that. Now, that was something that, you know, even the title, the people's car, is something very much linked with that it's being done for the people. Now, even though people were invested in that and were buying into trying to get a car and buying those, nobody really got a Volkswagen during the Nazi period. They would pay on that in installment, but they really didn't. They never really got those. So it was something where the Nazis made this promise. They showed all, you know, that you're better off now than you were 4 years ago. So if we can go to the next slide. Now here's something that and I'll try to move forward through a lot of these things quickly, but this was an illustrated Nazi newspaper. That's from 1936. And this particular issue focused on the concentration camp of Dachau. Now, often we tend to think, oh, the Nazis kept the concentration camps a secret, but actually they didn't. During the war, they kept the final solution of mass murder a secret, but they made no secret of the fact that they created concentration camps. Of course, how the way they were presented was very different than the reality. That is, the propaganda was aimed to mask and hide reality. And this issue was devoted to Dachau, and it shows the prisoners that that they're being treated with discipline and strictly, but that they're fed, they can go to the library, they're not mistreated, and that these are people that are asocial elements that need to be re-educated to re-enter German society. Now, this is something that began in 1933, where they would have these staged visits to Nazi concentration camps. So you had American diplomats that go there in 1933. You had the New York Times go to Dachau in 1933 and write, oh, these prisoners have a nice suntan and they're lounging, eating their lunch, they're going to the library, etc. So you have these staged visits, much like they would do later with Theresienstadt in 1944. But this was to mask what was really going on and to kind of answer the charges that were being made by political opponents from abroad and from Jews to say, you know, those stories of atrocities, they're just like what they made up in the First World War. They're lies that the Jews spread, lies that these emigres spread. It's not true. This, you've got proof. Here's photographs. Seeing is believing. And so they would do these on occasion to show, you know, that these people were not being brutalized, that prisoners were not being brutalized. Now, if we can go to the next one. Now, another thing that they tried to do was kind of use propaganda to promote these racial ideas. Remember that the Nazis used propaganda to say, we're bringing all Germans together. This was very appealing to people. You know, somebody who saw that he felt that German society had disintegrated, was not unified, felt this sense of belonging. But propaganda also was used to identify those groups who were not part of this national community. And so that was used to identify and to explain why. Just like the Nuremberg laws, you explained why Jews are not part of German society. You have all kinds of propaganda directed at that. This is one that's telling German youths that not to fraternize or befriend Afro-Germans. And it says the result, racial pride disappears. That is, if you make friends with people that are of this different race, your own sense of your racial pride, your own sense of your own ethnic goodness disappears because out of contact with people of a different race. And we go to the next one. Now, during the war years, and I'm going to leave off on this section, but during the war years, the Nazis, of course, tried to present the war both as a defensive endeavor and also to justify actions against particular groups or countries. So that, for instance, if you think about the way the war is portrayed, it is not presented as a war of Nazi aggression against Poland. Poland attacked Germany. And this was something Hitler very much believed in, is that you had to take the moral high ground. And if you play the victim, and the Nazi Germany was great at that, to say, we're not responsible, it's all these other groups. Poland and England are trying to encircle us. Poland is carrying out atrocities against ethnic Germans. Then when the invasion of the Soviet Union occurs, it's that Germany struck early to prevent the Soviet Union from conquering Western Europe. So Europe was saved because of German actions. And so the Nazis always portrayed themselves, the Nazi Germany, as being the victims of other groups. The Jews, of course, were conspiring, were had a worldwide conspiracy to destroy Germany. And so this was a pamphlet that was done in November of 1941. And this was shortly after the German Jews were forced to wear the Yellow Star of David. And that was something Goebbels, as Reich Minister of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, promoted very strongly. He was one of those figures directly responsible for having Jews wear the Yellow Star in Germany. But what he found out, and they found out from their public opinion gathering, was that not all Germans reacted negatively towards Jews as a result of that marking. That they found out that there were Germans that actually felt sorry for Jews, that they would give them, food or express some sympathy for their plight. In reaction to that, the Nazis escalated the propaganda to say, when you see this sign, and that's what that German says, and then you open it up, and it talks about, it says, well, It doesn't matter that Jew, that your Jewish neighbor is in cahoots with Jews in Moscow, London, New York, that you might have known him for all these years, but he's part of that. We lose the war. That guy, your neighbor, is going to take part in the destruction of Germany. And the Germans will be enslaved. And the Germans will be mistreated. And Goebbels wrote articles and he said, all Jews are guilty. The Jews are guilty. And he lists and he says they're all involved in this conspiracy to take over the world, etc. But he also says, but we don't expect you to do anything. That is, we don't. They don't expect. He says, don't take matters into your own hands. Let the state handle it. And of course, from a psychological perspective, that's easier for people to take. That is, they don't have to kill somebody. They just have to let the state deport them. And they don't say to either the Jews or the Germans that they're being sent to their death when they deport them. They're saying that, oh, they're being evacuated. Evacuated is the term that they used. Evacuated means you're taken from place of danger to someplace safe. Or they would say you're being transported to the east. So that, and people would say, in their minds, oh, well, it's probably not going to be nice, but at least, it's not going to be, it might be a harsher life, but they're not necessarily thinking of death. And that's essentially what they wanted to encourage, that over the course of time, what happens is this constant bombardment of anti-Semitic propaganda, which is aimed at inciting hatred, helps to create a climate of indifference where people don't care what happens. That is, they kind of rationalize it and say, well, I've got other issues I have to worry about, that, that what happens to Jews isn't really my concern. And I think that is one of the great dangers of all this, is that this isn't like Rwanda where they're telling people to go out and kill your neighbors with a machete in Germany or in Western Europe. That is, they're just saying, don't object to it. Let it happen. Let Jews be deported. And I think that there's something very sinister and very dangerous in that often we tend to overlook. But I want to just leave off here because I think we can get into some of the more detailed discussions of this issue in the next part.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen. I know we're running a little bit late, but hopefully we can get some questions from the chat. First, also, I want to say thank you everyone for joining us tonight and learning about this ever-present phenomena of propaganda. A brief survey link is being posted in the chat. If you could please take a moment to respond to that, that would be great. And I don't know, Chuck, did you want to say anything else before I go on with the rest of the closing?
Yeah,
you want to answer any questions?
I thought we would reserve just perhaps 5 minutes or so to think about the implications of what we've talked about this evening for current times, for global anti-Semitism. And I only had one question for Stephen. Maybe we can get into the chat from there. A few weeks ago, he talked to the Children of Survivors group, and he said that that anti-Semitic tropes, modern anti-Semitic tropes, are like a virus that mutates, which resonates pretty well today. Why did you use the term virus? What does it mean for a virus to mutate in thinking about global anti-Semitism and propaganda?
Well, when I was thinking about anti-Semitism, it's kind of amazing, first of all, how long it's existed, but also the ways in which it changes in response to new situations. So that, for instance, in the past, Jews were often accused of, they'd say, oh, Jews have no country, they're nomadic, they're parasitic, they feed off the host nation, etc. That was a common anti-Semitic trope. Then you have the creation of the state of Israel, and you have anti-Semites that say, well, Jews are colonizers. They're not from the Middle East. They don't deserve a state. And so you've got kind of, it's mutated into this, that it's, you go from Jews are bad because they have no state, and then Jews are bad because they have a state. So, and it changes, like that anti-Semitism, it doesn't, the world conspiracy theory that the Nazis promoted and the protocols of the elders of Zion promoted earlier, we still have those today. You just change the names on the people and the groups responsible. And it's mutated in a different way. But it's still it still bears some traces of this earlier thing, but it spreads that way. And I think, and I also think with social media and the internet, you allow these things to spread very rapidly, globally, in a very short amount of time. And I think social media and the internet allow, let's say, extremist voices, often tiny groups of people, to amplify their message to reach much larger groups. So in that sense, it's kind of like, I see it as a kind of a virus as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to remind people to please register for the next 2 sessions. Part 2 of the program is Let's Talk Truth or Consequences, Artificial Intelligence and Social Media, which is being co-sponsored by the Anti-Defamation League Midwest. And that is going to be on Thursday, October 21st at 7 p.m. Central Time. And part 3 is Let's Talk My Rights, Your Rights, Free Speech and Regulation. So that will be on a Monday, October 25th, 7 p.m. Central. When you register for these programs, you will receive the link on how to join the day of the program. Each session is a standalone program, so you can watch them in any order. One does not necessarily follow the other. All of the sessions are going to be recorded via various media, one of them being Chicago North Shore's YouTube channel. So if you need to miss a live session, please access the recordings. I want to say thank you to Jody Rabin for appearing on behalf of the National Council of Jewish Women, headquartered in Washington, D.C. A big thank you, obviously, to Chuck Meyers and Stephen Luckert for their masterful presentations. Well done, gentlemen. Plus all the many dedicated members of NCJW, Chicago North Shore and South Cook sections who work so hard to bring this important series to you. And special kudos for our session to Jan Schwartz as chair of our committee. So thank you again. Please make sure you complete your surveys. We would really like to see what you think. We don't really have time. If there were questions in the chat, I apologize that we couldn't get to them, but hopefully through the presentations, we answered most of your questions. So thank you very much for being part of our audience, and good night.